Hello and welcome to the 51%, a show about women reshaping our world. I'm Claire Pride, filling in for Annette Young. Coming up, we'll discuss French attitudes to seduction, sexuality and power with our guest, journalist Sophie Janinet, after many people in France and abroad were shocked by a letter criticising the Me Too campaign. And with the Detroit Auto Show underway and Saudi Arabia hosting its first women-only car show, we look at women in the auto industry. We start with French actress Catherine Deneuve saying sorry to victims of sexual assault after an open letter she signed caused global outrage. It says trying to seduce someone, even awkwardly, is not a crime. 74-year-old Deneuve stands by that, but she has apologised to assault victims hurt by the letter, which criticises the Me Too campaign and balance ton porc, or rat out your pig. Time now to bring in my guest. She is Sophie Janinet, a journalist and a feminist. Hello, thank you very much indeed for coming in.
Hello.
Now, I'd like our viewers to better understand where these signatories were coming from. Some people are saying that only in France would women criticise the Me Too campaign. Now, of course, that's not true. We've had Margaret Atwood. She has voiced some concerns. But there is a cultural divide. Tell us about the central place of seduction in French culture, or even in Latin culture.
You know, in the Middle Age, we were talking about courtship, and we created this thing where a woman needed to be protected because of their physiognomy, the way they are allegedly weaker than men, so they had to be courted, they had to be protected, and there is something seducing in that, mostly because it's been perpetuated in the culture, you know, in books and in movies, and so I understand that there is a certain appeal to that, but it doesn't change the fact that women can be courted without this domination in the seduction relationship. Michel Perrault, a great French historian herself, explains that there is a difference, that American feminists are a bit ahead of French feminists because of this notion of gallantry and courtship.
And there's a libertine tradition here.
Yes, so that's why it would be unfair to be too harsh on this open letter, because the notion of freedom is very dear to France on every possible level, and I understand that. What they're saying here is that they're afraid that the debates and the way we rat our pigs will prevent freedom in any way. But that is to say that there is that we cannot combine freedom and desire and equality, and that's not true. You can completely have a very free love and sexual life, but in a very equal way to do it.
Now, as I mentioned, Catherine Deneuve is in her 70s and other signatories are in their 50s and 60s. The letter says the Me Too campaign stems from a hatred of men. So let's take a listen to some reactions.
Les hommes ne sont pas nos ennemis.
Men aren't our enemies. If feminism is turned into a battle of the sexes, that wouldn't be good for gender equality. A good result for feminism would be men and women being treated the same, getting the same jobs and having the same responsibilities.
There's no grey zone between seduction and violence. It's not a question of degree, being hit on insistently, very insistently, and then being harassed. There's no difference in degree. There's a difference in nature. We're talking about two radically different things. And we're being told feminists are anti-men? I think it's society that's still far too anti-women.
So two radically different things, two different generations as well. Would you say that it's because people have a different idea of what gallantry is and what constitutes sexual harassment?
The perception of seduction, sexual harassment and all this is quite personal. But I would say that I think that Catherine Deneuve and the women in their 50s who wrote this open letter are less sensitive to the global movements that is mostly taking place thanks to the internet and social networks. So they're not feeling as a part of this global movement. And when you feel like a part of it, when you're in the younger generation that uses the internet and social networks a lot, and you're feeling like a part of this, and you can read all those tweets and actually see a bit of your story in each tweet, then I feel like it's easier for us to feel like part of this global movement and to see things a bit differently.
But isn't it also that society is different? And so at the time, especially in the acting world, women might not have been so shocked at certain behaviours that we are now.
Of course. There is this notion of having enough that Brigitte Bardot was saying that when someone tells her that she has a cute bottom, that makes her very happy, and that is good on her. But the fact that most of us, and mostly in the younger generation, yes, don't necessarily want to have our body commented on the public space area on a constant, all the time, makes a difference.
Now, since you mentioned Brigitte Bardot, the French actress, she also said that actresses are attention-seeking. So for me, that begs the question, where is female solidarity at here in France, when Catherine Deneuve also said that she was uncomfortable with pack mentality?
It's such a tricky issue, you know, this notion of solidarity again among women. But there is a problem that we can definitely see, and that's not just with this open letter. That's just generally in France. The way you see a very small number of women being CEOs, and when women get at the top in France, you don't see this movement that you can see in other countries where women they did. Comply to the masculine rules of being assertive and all this to get into a position of power. And once they're there, instead of being aware that it's not necessary to do that anymore because they are in a position of power and maybe they can reach out to the women below them, there's not this culture really. There's a real lack of sisterhood and helping one another, and I think that needs to change, and I think this movement will help change that as well.
You talked about the public sphere. The letter that Catherine Deneuve signed mentions public confession. Isn't that very French to find it vulgar to talk about your private life in the public sphere, particularly all over social media?
Well, it depends what you're talking about, because there is also this kind of privacy in America on some subjects. For example, if you ask any French in the street, they'll tell you that they think that there is too much Puritanism in the United States. But indeed, there is in the Latin culture this notion that when you're talking about what's going on in your relationship, in your family and all this, it should stay at home. And the fact that those women feel like those men are thrown on the public attention for doing something wrong without really any proof before any inquiry. And it is true, but at the same time, isn't that necessary? Since we've been trying for years, decades, centuries to say that men were doing wrong and no one ever listened. At some point, the freedom to be pestered and the freedom to seduce women in an awkward way is less prevalent than the freedom to live free of violence and harassment and all those things.
Thank you very much, Sophie. Sophie Janinet joining us there. Now, not everyone is a fan of the Me Too campaign, but the fact that we're even having this discussion is a win for women's rights. Another is Saudi Arabia's decision to allow women to drive. The law should be changed by June. Now, some women have already started weighing the pros and cons of various car models. A women-only car show was held recently in Jeddah. But the industry as a whole still has a long way to go in terms of gender equality, car show girls, sexist adverts, and there aren't many women at the top.
We even rent our cars to women, reads the advert, treading a fine line between humour and sexism. The cliché of female drivers is well known. It's not surprising, perhaps, when the world of cars has long been dominated by men. 60 years ago, cars were sold as symbols of power and virility, with women and their bodies used as a marketing tool. A form of sexism, one that wasn't uncommon at international car shows then, and can still be seen today. Few sales assistants agree to talk about it, but those that do have had an earful.
Men say, do you come with a car? Can I meet you after the show? Do you ride anything else?
But things might be changing. For some years now, just as many men as women can be seen doing the selling, with the women dressed largely the same as their male counterparts and trainers where there were once high heels. It could be the start of a revolution, and yet, missing from the boardrooms of the big manufacturers are women. Michelle Krebs was the first woman to review cars for the New York Times in the 90s. She's leading the conversation on discrimination and sexism in the workplace.
One of the unique things about the auto industry is a lot of times the events will be driving events. So you'll go to some place and with an auto manufacturer and you'll test drive cars. And a lot of bad behavior can happen there.
Management of the big names in the car industry is still male-heavy, and yet 2014 saw a step forward when Mary Barra became head of General Motors. She's the first and only female director of a big car manufacturer, taking the helm of a 200,000-strong company with 400 factories. And it's in these factories where harassment can be rife. A New York Times investigation in late December revealed a corporate culture at the car giant Ford that was hostile towards women. It uncovered cases of abuse towards female employees that dated back to the 90s. A harsh spotlight on Ford, the company promised to improve things, launching an awareness campaign in the wake of the investigation that called for zero tolerance.
So, Ford standing up for women. And the future looks brighter in the advertising world too, at least here in France, where 28 big brands, including car makers Renault and Peugeot, have committed to, they say, communicating responsibly. That should mean no more shocking adverts like this one.
Pour notre numéro de téléphone. Si nous trouvons un bout de papier, c'est pourquoi Nouvelle Renault Twingo vous offre l'option désolé de m'être garé là. Des petites cartes qui vous font...
Right, that's it for now. You can connect with us via our Facebook page, France24.51%, or send us a tweet at _51%. Thanks for your feedback so far. Do keep those comments coming in. I'll see you next week.